how can I tell the story about a strategy, direction, objective to people so well that they can tell the story equally well in a room I'm not in?
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook, presented by PDQ, Pretty Damn Quick and Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 146, and today we have a really special guest, someone who has seen it all from both sides of the retail counter, the digital frontier, and the executive suite. Kevin Ertell spent 20 years at Tower Records, working his way up from a high school clerk all the way to senior vice president, and along the way, he built one of the earliest e-commerce platforms in the music retail space. From there, he took on leadership roles at Borders, Nike, and Sur La Table, accumulating over 30 years of hard-won experience across some of the most iconic brands in retail. Now, Kevin is channeling all that experience into his book, The Strategy Trap: Why Companies Fail at Execution and How to Get It Right. And trust me, whether you're running a small team or a global organization, this conversation is going to be of interest to you. I hope you enjoy the show. Before we get started, a quick thank you as always to Max Brandstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Ertell. Kevin is a veteran executive and trusted advisor with more than 30 years of experience leading transformations at brands like Nike, Tower Records, and Sur La Table. As founder and CEO of Mistere Advistory and author of The Strategy Trap: Why Companies Fail at Execution and How to Get It Right, he helps companies of all sizes bring clarity, alignment, and action to their strategies. Known for his straight talk, practical insight, and ability to cut through complexity, Kevin draws on deep experience across leadership, marketing, operations, and business growth to help teams turn ideas into results. When he's not helping companies get unstuck, he's likely playing bass, cooking for family, or following Cleveland sports with what he says is stubborn optimism. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for being here, Mark. It is very stubborn optimism. It's, I don't know what to say about it. We got to keep the hopes high.
Got to keep going. Hey, I'm a Giants fan in football. We're no better. And my Mets are pretty pathetic these days. So I know what the pain is. But anyway, good to see you. Thanks for joining. As we start all of these shows, we like to get the guest's first story, kind of where you grew up, maybe what your upbringing was like, and how that upbringing might have suggested the career path that you would take.
Well, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where my sports optimism or diehardness started. I lived there till I was 8, and then we moved to Las Vegas. My dad got a job at a savings and loan in Vegas, so it had nothing to do with gambling. And we moved out there, and that's where I kind of grew up. My senior year of high school, I started working for Tower Records. And Tower, I changed my whole life. And I think Tower is where I got into retail to begin with. I spent a long time at Tower. Tower is a company that really believed in building from within. So I started as a senior in high school, and I left 20 years later as a senior vice president. So it had a lot to do with how I ended up and where I got today.
One of the many things that's interesting about your career, and I'm going to ask some questions around the 20 plus years, I guess, at Tower. You've been in 2 organizations whose businesses have been totally disrupted over the course of time. One was Tower Records, and obviously that entire industry is different, and then Borders. What is it like having been in 2 companies that have been totally disrupted, and has that changed or added to the way you think about retail?
It definitely has changed how I think about retail and how I think about strategy and I think about innovation. Tower, there was this industry that just was really thriving off people not only loving and having a passion for music, but then the innovation where it went from vinyl to cassette to CD actually had people rebuying their collections over and over again until it was all of a sudden gone. So, you could get really fat on that idea for a long time, and then something can change in an instant and flip the entire model. And I learned at the time, because I saw this at both companies, it only took a shift of about 15% of the business. Losing just about 15%, like completely disrupted the model. So I think sometimes that's something I think about all the time too. It doesn't take that much to really mess up the model. So you've got to, really be paying close attention to what's going on and how it might disrupt you. Or even better, how can you disrupt yourself?
We'll talk about your consulting, and I told you I jump around on this show
Yeah,
a
sure.
lot, depending upon what the guest is saying. As you think through work that you're doing with clients now, is that something that's in the forefront of your mind? I mean, for me, I didn't really work in businesses that were disrupted. I maybe that's unfair. I was in the catalog space, and that totally got disrupted by digital. But are you helping brands actually think about how they could be disrupted and how they avoid it?
Yeah, because I think even when you're talking about execution of any kind, whether it's just disruption or innovation, or it's just how to get a lot of people focused on the same thing, I think you have to get very, very clear on what your North Star is, what value you're providing to your consumer is, or your customer, and then figuring out the best ways to get there. I think that's true whether you're running any kind of innovation or any kind of execution. You've got to always stay on that North Star and stay focused on what your expected outcomes are and not get too focused on a specific how to get there, but find that big pattern to drive towards. And so I think that's true whether it's an industry like music, or you're thinking about, okay, what is music doing for people? It's not about the CD or the vinyl, it's about the music, and how do you carry that forward as an example.
All right, so let's go back to Tower. You started really from the ground up. Walk us quickly through the 20 years, if you can do it quickly, where you started and, perhaps where you ended and, some of the key elements of, the experience that you took away from it.
Yeah, so I started, as a clerk at Tower Las Vegas. And Tower really believed in promoting within, and they also believed in the store sort of operating almost independently, like an independent business. So I was able to quickly get different types of roles in the store. I became an assistant manager, started to become a store manager. And when you managed a Tower store, you really were running a small business. I mean, obviously you hired all the staff, but you owned the P&L. You did the local marketing. You bought the inventory for the store. I always joke, if the plumbing was fixed, you were responsible for that too. You had to do everything. So I was able to get all these skills in leadership and business management and understand all the components of a business within these stores. And I moved to a few different stores. And then to totally date myself, one of those stores got a computer. And so I got really into the computer, and I started figuring out things I could do in the store with this computer we had that were making our business better. That had my regional manager ask me if I'd show the other managers in the region what I was doing. That got the attention of the corporate office, and they asked me if I would come take a role in corporate and travel around the world and teach people what I was doing with the computer. I had no training in computers whatsoever, but I did that, and that job was in IT. So I started learning more about technology. This was, mid 90s or so. Here I was, this guy who now knew retail and I knew technology, and digital and e-commerce was starting to become a thing, and I was just a natural for it because I had both those backgrounds. So I ended up leading the team that initially built the TowerRecords.com technology, and then I became the senior vice president of TowerRecords.com. We built that site in 1998, so really, really early days.
What did you build it on?
It was Microsoft
.NET.
Commerce Server,
Yep,
Commerce
right.
Server, I think.
Right.
And then it was .NET, yeah. Early days, we were, I remember it was like all this work to figure out how do we get song samples and cover art to download over dial-up modems, all the stuff you had to do then is just crazy to think where we've come.
That is interesting. As you think about, the leadership challenges that you faced having your own store, which is, so decentralized as opposed to the way stores have, pretty much operated now, that retail leadership mentality, you must have gained quite a bit from that.
A ton. I had to do everything. So I had to learn people management skills. I had to learn how the P&L worked because I was driving those numbers every day. Again, we were buying our own inventory, so I had to kind of understand where that money was going, how much money we had tied up in different areas, and what our turn was. Amazing to have those kind of skills and have the autonomy to drive the business there. So I had the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from them and continue to get better. But I'd say probably more than anything is it's the people leadership skills I learned. Some of those stores had teams of 120, 130 people that I had to learn a lot of personalities and figure out how people function. It's a really great training ground for the rest of my career, really.
It's interesting as you were talking about, having, your own business in the store, the Barnes and Noble business grew to be, so large, lots of centralization of capabilities. And, when it finally fell on hard times and changed hands, the fellow who took over that business, one of the things I had read about is that he really wanted to put the store managers to become booksellers again. And, they kind of decentralized. And, if what they were going to buy in Cleveland, and put in their store might be different than what they put in a store in New Jersey. And, I think that's one of the things that they say has allowed them to turn around and close a bunch of unprofitable large stores and start opening new stores.
And I think that's such a smart way to go. Tower was very much like that. And to the point where when I tell people I worked at Tower in the headquarters, they almost inevitably think the headquarters is wherever they first discovered Tower. And I think that's like a powerful statement of that because every store was different and it reflected its local community. So people felt like, well, it must be from here. So I think it's a really smart way to do it.
Static checkouts are costing you money. Every shopper sees the same offers and too many walk away. That's why Shopify's fastest growing brands use PDQ, Pretty Damn Quick, the checkout segmentation platform. PDQ personalizes the checkout experience by creating tailored flows for each customer segment, whether they're first-time buyers, high spenders, or returning VIPs. Their platform runs ongoing A/B tests, automatically sets the best performing experience, and keeps optimizing for higher conversion and AOV. The result? More completed checkouts, less abandonment, and millions in uplift. Discover your brand's optimal checkout with PDQ at PrettyDamnQuick.com.
So you make a leap from Tower to Borders. So why the transition? And, was it something different that you were looking for?
Yeah, I'd been at Tower for 20 years, and so I figured it was time to try to do something different. I got recruited to Borders with a chance to do something I had never done before. I had a chance to go there and lead the development and launch of the Borders Rewards loyalty program. So kind of early on, getting involved with loyalty programs was an opportunity I didn't want to pass up. So I took the plunge.
And 4 years at Borders, and just guide the listeners because I don't know exactly the timing. Where was Borders in their life cycle?
Yeah, so Borders was doing well still at the time. There was two things going on. One, there was this loyalty program to launch. Also, Borders.com at the time was on Amazon. I don't know if you remember when some of these companies like gave up their business to Amazon. So I also kind of wanted to push the idea to bring it back. So that's what I did when I went there. We first built and launched Borders Rewards, and then we took Borders.com back from Amazon and launched that. So that was all between 2005 and 2009. I think Borders kind of went out of business 2011, something like that.
Right. So it was close. And would you say that that deal with Borders and Amazon was just the early signs of it going away?
One thing happened with both Borders and Tower is that they had a lot of debt. And I think debt constrains your ability to pivot when things change. They had their own Borders.com that wasn't doing well. And that's when they took the offer from Amazon and moved it over to Amazon. It's a, profit saving measure. that ultimately, probably you could look back at that and say was giving away a lot of the future of the business to a direct competitor.
So you spent a little bit of time on what I like to call the dark side, on the vendor side of our business. You went to 4C in retail strategy. So that was kind of a shift in the work that you were doing. Tell us why you made that change.
Here's what, starting to have its issues. I decided, like you said, to try things on the dark side. And I really loved 4C Results. I believed in the technology they had in measuring customer satisfaction. So I decided to go there and work with over 100 retailers and help them better understand how to measure customer satisfaction and improve their experience.
Were there any patterns that you noticed, across, you had two prominent stints of your own at Tower and Borders, and then you saw multiple clients. Any patterns that you saw about, how companies were thinking about strategy versus execution?
I think I definitely started to really see in that role the companies that had the most clarity around their North Star, and those were the ones that seemed to be doing the best. Even when we were just talking about measuring customer satisfaction, those are the ones that understood that measurement in context of what they were trying to ultimately drive as a business. I started to see that there for sure.
How do you define strategy?
I think strategy is a set of choices that you make about what you're going to do, and equally choices you make about what you're not going to do as you drive forward towards the North Star, with a clear description of why and a clear expected outcome. It's probably the best way I would say it.
It's interesting because, I've been in a number of businesses myself, and everybody has a little bit of a different view of strategy, how to define it, how to execute on it. But you've made a nice career helping it. And we're going to get to your book in a second. But before we do that, some time at Sur La Table as SVP of Digital. For those that may not know the Sur La Table business, what was that?
Yeah, so U.S. kitchenware retailer. So we did, all sorts of hard goods in terms of kitchenware, kitchen products, cooking products, as well as we had cooking classes as well. So those were a fun environment to have. So it was a little bit of theater and a little bit of retail.
Different for you at all? I mean, I've been in a number of different verticals. So you were in books and records, and now, housewares. Pretty much the same kind of execution, would you say?
I think a lot of similarity. One thing I've been lucky in my career, I think, is everything I've done has been around passions. People are passionate about music, they're passionate about reading, they're passionate about cooking. That customer base, it's kind of nice to see.
Good experience from Sur La Table. I love the idea about the passions that you've been involved in, and no bigger passion than a small company called Nike. You spent 7 years there, one of those foundational experiences that we all hope to have somewhere in our career. Tell us about the role and what you took away from your time at Nike.
Yeah, so as there 7 years, I had three different roles. Initially, I led digital for the running category. The company was organized around sports, so you had running and basketball and soccer, et cetera. And so I was sort of the GM of digital for global running. Did that for a while, then I became the head of global digital operations, so kind of everything we were doing digitally around the world. And then the last 3 years, I kind of went full circle a little bit in my career, and I was a VP of global retail operations. So we're with Nike stores all around the world, 6,000 stores, I think, or so. 8,000, actually.
Was there again, a perception, Nike being this, huge company, Sur La Table, not nearly as large, different size companies, different challenges, I imagine.
Definitely different. Nike is so big. So it was really different there just in learning how to move this sort of giant ship, figuring out how to get all in the same direction all around the world, lots of different cultures, lots of different ways of doing things.
Were there one or two things that you took away that helped you either write this book, The Strategy Trap, and help you in the consulting work that you've been doing?
I learned a lot of skills in terms of how to get people moving in the same direction. And one thing I think I really learned that was so important there that I had to get so much better at was how can I tell the story about a strategy, direction, objective to people so well that they can tell the story equally well in a room I'm not in. And that became a really important skill to figure out how to master that I think goes a long way towards how you sort of really develop execution in any company, really.
What's the secret sauce that you've figured out?
Simplification. It goes to using basic words and be super clear about where you're headed, why it matters, what the expected outcome is. Avoid defining the how and delegate the how instead, so that people can make it their own. I think that is super critical, as long as they're making it their own within the sort of defined framework.
Do you find that we tend to, that maybe this is, I'm leading the witness here. Do you find in the roles that you've been in the consulting work, that we oftentimes find ourselves focused on things that don't really matter and we forego some of the things that really do?
Yes, I think that oftentimes there is strategies that are created that have too much detail in them that end up spinning people off in the wrong direction without being clear enough about the big picture and most important components of the big picture. People struggle with that a lot, I find, and I think it's because I think the strategy definitions that work best, in some sense, a little bit vague, because they're not giving people instruction, they're giving people direction. And I think that's the difference.
The devil is in the details. You probably have heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that could make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who's helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com.
You have 30 years in as a retail executive. We talked about the brands, Nike, Borders, and Tower. What finally made you say, I need to write a book about this experience?
Well, this company, Mistere Advisory, and I really wanted to focus on this idea of execution because, you see it all around that most strategies fail. There's a ton of data on that, and the number one reason is poor execution. So I really wanted to focus on that and figure out, how can I help this big problem that's out there? How can I help these companies that have great ideas and just can't seem to get them off the ground? So I wanted to focus on that. I wanted to write the book partly to really get my thoughts together, but then use that as a vehicle to convey those messages. And when I wrote the book, I said, look, I looked out there. There's a million books about how to write a strategy. There's just not much about execution. And the majority of books that are out there about execution are pretty much written by consultants and academics. So I wanted to write it from the operator's perspective. And I also didn't want it to be just my point of view. So I started to interview other people who had been successful with execution. I ended up interviewing more than 60 people across of industries, all sizes of companies, all types of ownerships, whether it's public or private equity or owner operated, to get everyone's sort of perspective. My goal was to get 1,000 years of experience that I could put into this guide. And what I found as I started to put all that, there was a lot of commonalities in ways that we could put this together to make it a system that people could apply within their own business, regardless of industry or even size of company, that would help get those ideas across the finish line.
The book is called The Strategy Trap. What is the trap, and why do smart leaders keep falling into it, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, the trap is when leaders get all excited about the idea and don't spend nearly enough time creating all the conditions it takes to get all the humans on the team to actually bring it to life.
Interesting. And, one of the things I've talked with many that I have worked with, and I know this is something you touch on, in the book, this idea that you really want to be able to move fast, right? And what's the best thing to do? Should I move really fast and put out a viable a pilot, if you will, something that's 60 or 70% as good as I think I could ultimately make it and get some idea of learning? Or do I wait and get it 90, 95%? And in my mind, the thought is if you get it to 95%-ish and it doesn't work, well, at least you can't hang your hat on the fact it didn't work because of execution. How do you think about that?
The thing I heard most as I talked to all these people, undoubtedly the most, was you have to slow down to speed up. But what that doesn't mean go slow. I always like to think about it in terms of like if you're in a car, race car or something, you slow down into the curve so that you can accelerate out of it. So it doesn't mean go slow, but in the book, I have what I call the 6 C's system, and it's the definition of what this means here. And I have 2 phases in the book. So you have setting the stage, and then you have showtime. In each of those phases, there's 3 C's. In setting the stage, it's co-creation, clarity, and capacity. So bring people together that are all parts of the company who are going to be involved in this process to create the strategy, co-create the strategy. And you do that to get alignment and validation and ultimately commitment. Then you got to have clarity. You got to be able to, how you're going to talk about it. It's got to be simple. It's got to be meaningful for people. And capacity. So you have to make sure you have space. So that's phase 1, is setting the stage. Showtime then is communication, coordination, and coaching. And so that's a little bit more about activating things in terms of, how are you going to communicate it? And that for me is early, loud, and continuous. You have to be early explaining the reason for change, then be loud about it, make sure people hear it, and then keep talking about it all the time till you're way sick of it. You got to coordinate, and then coaching is about the active part of leadership. The reason I call that a system, and to your example, is that you can run that over. So you can have a pilot like you talked about, and you can run all 6 of those C's in that pilot, but you're sort of defining that pilot as best you can and then running it and coordinating it. And then you can cycle it again as you take it wider. You have to kind of operate on all of those 6 C's kind of continuously to make sure you've corralled people and got everybody all on the same page all the time.
Interesting. And so as part of your consultancy, Mistere, and I'd love to hear about some of the clients that you work with. Is that what you're helping folks do? Take this 6 C's and implement them in strategic execution?
Yeah. So I'm working with companies. I do a lot of workshops. So come in and work with to get them set up. So it depends on kind of where they're at. Sometimes it can be a short workshop that maybe we do in an afternoon that kind of gets a rough idea, maybe for something smaller like a pilot. Or maybe it's a 4-day offsite where we're really going to take a bigger look at the entire company and where they're headed. But it's all about running through a series of exercises and help people get set up within that system to be ready to really start to function as they go through and execute their strategies.
Where, if at all, do you find that you get pushback? Because I would imagine, if although you would like to get a client and everybody within the client is on board, are there naysayers in the group?
Yeah. I love naysayers. So I think actually naysayers are really important. I talk about this in the book. You can't just operate on advocates. You have to have detractors. Detractors are actually super powerful because they're going to push and represent a point of view that is probably opposite of yours, but that doesn't mean that many other people in the company don't have it. So you want to invite them in early and help them validate whatever it is you're working on. Really push through those ideas and make sure that you really have considered things completely. The more you bring those folks in, the better.
So I guess you have this, you talk about needing to be 70% aligned, 100% committed. What does that mean? And why don't you need everyone fully aligned? I guess you kind of touched on that a bit.
Yeah, I think also it's not, whenever you're talking about a strategy, you're talking about some future thing you're going to do. And nobody can predict the future with that certainty. So it's understandable that people might not be 100% aligned on something. 100% alignment is not what you need, though. I say 70%. So, and by that, I don't mean 7 out of 10 people are bought in on it. I mean, everybody is at least a 7 out of 10. They're more than halfway there to say, yeah, I think I can agree with this is something worth pursuing. But that's when you lock in the commitment, because the commitment is what makes all the difference. So you have to be able to walk out of the room and say, okay, I'm mostly aligned with this. I have some doubts in certain areas, but I am going to commit to making it work. That commitment is so critical because it starts second guessing and sort of all the psychological things that can pull you back. So you really need to get everybody to go, yeah, man, and I'm going to push and make sure this happens. That's why I say 70% aligned, 100% committed.
Right. What came first, the start of your consulting business or the book?
The start of the consultant business was first, and I was initially kind of writing blogs and that sort of thing, and I like writing, and a number of people suggested I should write a book, and I mean I've heard that my whole career, never was quite ready to do it, but all of a sudden I had a little more time on my hands, and really decided that it would make sense to spend time really clarifying all my thinking on it, doing a lot of research to make sure that this was sort of backed up by not only other people who I put a lot of the science in there, the psychology and the neuroscience about why people behave the way they behave and how they work together. It was a massively cool learning experience for me, but I sort of put all that in the book too.
I wonder if I ever wrote a book, I'd probably, I don't know, I feel like I could, fill up 3 pages. I'm not sure I could get something as well put together as what you've done with the strategy trap. One of the things that's interesting about going through the book and then now listening to you, is there a misconception that leaders have about strategy that you really are challenging in the book?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one is that strategy and execution are 2 different things. It's the central premise of the book is that they are one. Strategy is part of execution in my book. In my book, literally, but I think it's critical to realize it that way. That's, again, when I talk about the strategy trap, if you get like a small group of leaders and they go in and they create this strategy and they bring in whatever, McKinsey or consultant or whatever, and they create a PowerPoint deck and then they just hand it off, it's not going to work. You have to be building this thing and iterating it and going along the way, but bringing people in who are actually part of bringing it to life. When you make execution the thing with strategy being part of it, you have the best possible chance.
One of the things that I love about doing this show is that I hear from people that are very early stage of their career that listen, and then there's seasoned executives, friends that still listen when they they see a good guest, somebody like you. What's one of the things that you would think about that's the same message for people, whether they're early in their career or later in their career, about this whole story of strategy and execution?
I think that it's, again, thinking about it as one thing, bringing people in and making it a team effort is such a critical component. And then you just can't forget about how important it is to communicate over and over and over again. I think we humans are actually pretty terrible at communicating. I like one thing I always talk about too is like, imagine you're in a bar, we've all been in these bar conversations, and you are talking to somebody in this loud bar and you're not really hearing everything they're saying. You're catching some of it. You kind of have a gist of it, but when they smile, you smile. And when they laugh, you laugh, but if you flip that around now and you're the one talking, you're talking, right? And everything you're saying. And you're getting these signals. They're smiling when you smile. They're laughing when you laugh. So you assume they understood everything. And I think this is what happens in businesses all the time. We send this stuff out and we assume everybody got it, and they didn't. So you have to be constantly talking about it, constantly checking to see if people understood it, and reiterating over and over and over again. I think that's one of the biggest problems in businesses. We don't do enough of that.
That's a great point. And as I told you at the beginning, we look for 3 key takeaways for our listeners, and that's a great one. But before we do our 2-minute drill, what's the one thing you'd want a marketing leader to do differently starting tomorrow?
I guess I would say focus on clarity for your team. Focus on a clear North Star, a clear why, and a clear set of expected outcomes, and then delegate the how to them. If you can really help them understand where things are headed and why that matters and what success looks like, they know what to do with that now, and they can start to drive it.
Good stuff. So let's give one more plug. Tell everybody the name of the book.
The book is The Strategy Trap: Why Companies Fail at Execution and How to Get It Right.
And where can they get it? Not at Borders.
Can't get it at Borders. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. It's at Amazon, of course, at a lot of bookstores throughout the country. Powell's Books in Portland.
That's great. Good stuff, Kevin. Really appreciate you joining the show. We do a 2-minute drill at the end, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are you ready?
I am ready. I've listened to the podcast. I know what's coming.
Okay. A brand that you admire or that inspires you?
Trader Joe's.
That's a good one. Favorite app on your phone?
Spotify for sure.
Last website other than Amazon that you shopped from?
Untuck It.
Buying some
favorite
shirts, huh? There you go.
Yeah.
Something that you're not good at but wish that you were?
Singing.
Charitable organization that you're passionate about?
Casita Capan in Honduras. I'm on the board there. We work with orphan children and single mothers that are very poor.
Oh, that's great. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Teleportation.
Other than family, what's your most prized possession?
I'm going to say my massage chair.
Oh, okay. I like that. Where can people reach out to you on social media?
Definitely LinkedIn is kind of the main spot for sure. And you can also go to my website, mistereadvistory.com.
Okay, that's great. Well, look, thanks for joining the show. It was nice to see you again. You've had an amazing career. The information in the book is just outstanding. So, like I said at in the show here, whether you're early in your career or later in your career, I think you can get a lot out of this. Kevin's got great experience to share. So, thanks, Kevin. Good to see you.
Thanks, Mark. Great to see you too.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Kevin Ertell for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, strategy without execution is just a plan. Kevin's whole book is built around this idea. Too many companies put enormous energy into crafting a beautiful strategy, then treat execution as an afterthought. The real work happens in the follow-through, and that's where most organizations fall short. Number 2, co-creation beats top-down mandates every time. If you want your team to truly own a strategy, they need to have a hand in building it. Kevin's framework starts here for a reason. People commit to what they help create. So before you roll out your next big initiative, ask yourself, who's in the room and do they have a real voice? And number 3, aim for 70% alignment with 100% commitment. This one really stuck with me. You don't need everyone to agree on every detail. That's an impossible standard that leads to paralysis. What you need is enough shared understanding that your team can move forward together, fully bought in. That's the difference between a team that executes and a team that stalls. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.